As we close our eyes and prepare to drift into a quiet night of rest, let us gently journey back thousands of years to a time when the first great civilizations took root between two rivers. This is Mesopotamia, often called the cradle of civilization, where humanity's earliest experiments in urban life, writing, and law unfolded. In this soothing exploration, we will spend time with the figure of Hammurabi, one of the most famous rulers of ancient Mesopotamia, whose name echoes across history for the code of laws he left behind. Our purpose tonight is not only to learn, but to let the steady rhythm of history guide us into a state of calm reflection, where the details of long-gone worlds flow like a gentle stream of thought, preparing the mind for sleep. Mesopotamia, meaning the land between rivers, lies between the Tigris and Euphrates in what is today Iraq and parts of Syria and Turkey. Its fertile soil, fed by seasonal floods, made possible the cultivation of wheat, barley, and dates, as well as the domestication of sheep, goats, and cattle. This rich environment fostered the rise of city-states like Uruk, Ur, and Babylon, each with their own traditions, rulers, and deities. In these places, humanity took steps that still shape our world: the invention of cuneiform writing on clay tablets, the construction of ziggurats that rose toward the heavens, and the codification of laws that set standards for justice and order. Hammurabi, who ruled Babylon from around 1792 to 1750 BCE, stands at the center of our narrative. His reign marked a turning point when Babylon rose from a modest city to the heart of an empire. Through diplomacy, warfare, and the careful administration of resources, Hammurabi united much of Mesopotamia under his authority. He was not the first Mesopotamian king, nor the last, but his legacy endures because of the Code of Hammurabi, a remarkable collection of nearly 300 laws inscribed on a stone stele. The laws covered everything from property disputes to trade, marriage, and punishment. They reflect not only the realities of daily life in Babylon, but also a philosophy of justice in which order was seen as a divine gift entrusted to the king by the gods. To understand Hammurabi, we must also understand the world that shaped him. Mesopotamian society was deeply religious, oriented around a pantheon of gods who represented forces of nature and aspects of human life. Temples were the centers of both worship and economic activity, with priests recording offerings, taxes, and contracts. Families lived in houses of mud brick, gathered water from canals, and measured their days by the rhythm of planting and harvest. Merchants traded along caravan routes that stretched as far as Anatolia and the Persian Gulf, bringing metals, timber, and luxury goods into Babylon. Scribes, trained from youth, pressed wedges into clay with their styluses, leaving behind records that tell us about everything from grain rations to epic poetry. As we drift through this history, we will move in gentle stages, beginning with the birth of Mesopotamian civilization, tracing the rise of Babylon, and watching as Hammurabi established his realm. We will linger over the details of daily life, the hum of markets, the solemnity of rituals, the complexity of laws, and the sweep of empires that rose and fell along the riverbanks. Each chapter will unfold slowly, like a story read aloud in a quiet library, each word chosen to calm as well as to teach. By the end, we will see not only the figure of Hammurabi, but the wider currents of Mesopotamian history, from its beginnings in myth to its legacy in later civilizations. This is not a tale of battles alone, nor of kings in their palaces, but of a whole society striving for stability in an unpredictable world. Floods and droughts, rivalries between cities, the whims of gods, all these were part of Mesopotamian experience. Yet, within these challenges, people carved out order. They built walls, dug canals, raised families, and recorded their stories. Hammurabi's laws, carved in enduring stone, can be read as an effort to fix in place what was otherwise fragile: justice, fairness, and accountability. And so, as we begin this journey into the heart of the ancient world, imagine yourself walking through the gates of Babylon. You see the bustling streets, lined with houses and workshops, the smoke of hearths rising into the warm air, the calls of merchants trading wool and grain. You hear the chanting of priests at the great temple of Marduk, Babylon's chief god, whose favor Hammurabi claimed for his reign. And in the distance, the palace where the king sat in judgment, listening to petitions, issuing decrees, and shaping the destiny of his people. This is the world of Hammurabi and Mesopotamia. Let the images settle in your mind as softly as a lullaby, and let the flow of history carry you into the calm waters of sleep. With each chapter, we will move deeper into this story until it surrounds us like the sound of a quiet river. For now, rest easy and prepare to journey through time. The story of Mesopotamia begins with its rivers. As we settle into the calm stream of this history, we picture the Tigris and the Euphrates flowing steadily across an otherwise arid landscape. Their waters nourish the soil, spreading life where deserts would otherwise stretch unbroken. In this fertile crescent, humans found the conditions to transition from simple farming communities into complex cities. The landscape itself is the first character in our tale, shaping the lives of those who would one day call it home. Around 10,000 years ago, small groups of people began cultivating cereals such as barley and wheat. These first farmers learned to harness the seasonal floods that brought silt and nutrients from the mountains. In doing so, they laid the foundations for irrigation, a practice that would sustain entire civilizations. Canals branched off from the rivers like quiet veins, carrying water to fields. In the stillness of the night, one might imagine hearing the soft splash of water through channels, the rustle of grain bending in the breeze, and the hum of life taking root. The earliest settlements were modest, but their impact profound. Archaeological sites such as Eridu and Uruk reveal clusters of mud brick houses, arranged around communal spaces. These were not yet great cities, but they contained the seeds of urban life, people living together, sharing resources, and developing collective identities. As these communities grew, they required organization. Someone had to allocate water, maintain the canals, and resolve disputes. In time, leadership emerged, first among elders and priests, and eventually among kings who claimed divine sanction for their rule. The environment was not always kind. The Tigris, swift and unpredictable, sometimes flooded violently, while the Euphrates meandered with changing courses. Farmers faced both drought and inundation, learning resilience and careful planning. The unpredictability of nature impressed upon Mesopotamians a worldview in which gods were powerful, capricious forces. Temples rose in each settlement, serving both as houses for deities and as centers of economic life. Offerings of grain and livestock were recorded on clay tablets by early scribes, whose wedge-shaped marks, cuneiform, became one of humanity's first writing systems. As writing developed, so too did memory. Clay tablets preserved contracts, trade agreements, and myths. They remind us that the roots of civilization are as much about imagination as administration. The Epic of Gilgamesh, for example, grew from this soil, telling of kings, gods, and the search for immortality. By candlelight, as families gathered in their simple homes of sun-dried brick, these stories connected individuals to a larger sense of order and destiny. Even today, as we drift into slumber, the cadence of such myths carries a lulling rhythm, linking us to people who lived thousands of years ago. Urbanization accelerated in the 4th millennium BCE, with Uruk becoming one of the world's first true cities. Its population may have reached tens of thousands, with monumental temples rising above the plains. Ziggurats, stepped towers of mud brick, stretched toward the heavens, embodying the link between earth and sky. In their shadow, markets bustled with trade. Farmers brought grain, herders sold wool, and merchants exchanged goods from distant lands. Silver, copper, and timber arrived through long-distance routes, creating the first stirrings of global commerce. Yet, amid this bustle, life remained deeply tied to the rhythm of the rivers and the turning of the seasons. The invention of the wheel, around 3500 BCE, transformed transport and trade. Wooden carts rumbled along dirt paths, carrying harvests and pottery. Potters used the wheel to refine their craft, shaping symmetrical vessels for storage and cooking. These technological advances seem small in isolation, but together they gave rise to a society capable of sustaining large populations. With more food and goods circulating, social hierarchies became sharper. Nobles, priests, merchants, and farmers each had roles to play, and at the margins of society, laborers and enslaved people carried heavy burdens. Mesopotamia was not a single, unified land, but a patchwork of city-states. Ur, Lagash, Kish, and others competed for dominance, sometimes through warfare, sometimes through alliances. High walls surrounded their centers, not only for protection, but also as symbols of strength. Within, Temples and palaces dominated the skyline, while ordinary houses clustered in winding streets. The scent of baked bread mingled with the smoke of hearth fires. At dawn, livestock bleated as herders led them out, and at dusk, families gathered for meals of bread, dates, and beer. Life was full, demanding, and profoundly communal. It is here, in these early centuries, that the patterns of Mesopotamian history were set. The cycle of rise and fall, the reliance on rivers, the blend of innovation and vulnerability, all would continue across the centuries. Into this landscape, Babylon would emerge, first a small settlement, and then a power destined for greatness. Before Hammurabi, the land was already rich with history, its people already accustomed to navigating both hardship and abundance. The rivers had given them life, and in return, they sought to impose order upon the unpredictable forces around them. As we pause at the close of this first section, let us reflect gently. Civilizations, like dreams, are woven from both fragility and persistence. The rivers of Mesopotamia remind us that life flows onward, sometimes calmly, sometimes with sudden force. In listening to this ancient story, we float with that current, at ease, carried slowly into the next chapter of our journey. From the hum of early Mesopotamian settlements, we drift onward to the story of Babylon, a city that began as little more than a modest town along the Euphrates River. In its earliest centuries, Babylon did not command the sweeping attention of the region. Cities like Ur and Uruk still dominated the imagination of their neighbors. Yet Babylon endured, and over time, its position on trade routes, coupled with its fertile surroundings, allowed it to grow in strength. It is here, in this emerging city, that the world would one day meet Hammurabi. But first, we must see how Babylon rose from obscurity to prominence. Archaeological traces suggest that Babylon existed as early as the 3rd millennium BCE, though its presence was overshadowed by more powerful centers. It was situated strategically between northern and southern Mesopotamia, a natural crossroads for trade and culture. Merchants moving metals, textiles, and grain often passed through its streets. This flow of goods gave the town a measure of wealth, and with wealth came the seeds of political ambition. As centuries passed, Babylon's leaders positioned themselves to take advantage of shifting alliances and the vulnerabilities of their rivals. During the early 2nd millennium BCE, the political map of Mesopotamia was a shifting mosaic. The great city of Ur had collapsed after repeated invasions and environmental stress, leaving smaller kingdoms to vie for dominance. Amorite tribes, originally from western regions, had settled in Mesopotamia and established dynasties. Babylon itself was ruled by Amorite kings, and among them Hammurabi would one day emerge. But before his reign, Babylon was still a secondary power, contending with stronger neighbors such as Larsa, Isin, and Eshnunna. The character of the city in these years was one of growth and aspiration. Its walls, made of sun-dried brick, encircled a population that combined farming, herding, and craft production. Canals carried water from the Euphrates into fields, while streets echoed with the sounds of craftsmen shaping bronze tools and carving seals. Within temples, priests conducted rituals to local deities, though the god Marduk was already rising to prominence. His temple in Babylon became a focal point, both spiritually and politically, laying the groundwork for the city's later identity as his sacred domain. As Babylon sought to assert itself, military campaigns were inevitable. Control of water rights and fertile land often brought neighboring cities into conflict. Armies in Mesopotamia were not vast by modern standards, but they were formidable. Soldiers carried spears, axes, and bows, while chariots provided mobility across the plains. Campaigns were seasonal, timed so as not to disrupt the agricultural cycle. Victories brought tribute, captives, and prestige, all of which reinforced the authority of kings. For Babylon, success in battle meant gradual recognition as a player in the larger geopolitical scene. The kings who ruled before Hammurabi paved the way with cautious diplomacy and selective conflict. They expanded Babylon's influence outward, sometimes through marriage alliances, sometimes by exploiting rivalries between larger states. Each generation brought the city closer to prominence. By the time Hammurabi came to the throne in 1792 BCE, Babylon was no longer a minor settlement, but a contender for regional leadership. His challenge would be to transform that position into lasting dominance. What distinguished Babylon in this period was not only its political maneuvers, but also its cultural vitality. The city absorbed traditions from Sumerian, Akkadian, and Amorite sources, blending them into a distinct identity. Its scribes used cuneiform to keep records of trade, land ownership, and temple offerings. Schools trained young men in writing, mathematics, and law, preparing them for service in administration. Literature flourished as scribes recopied older epics, myths, and hymns, ensuring their survival for future generations. These acts of preservation gave Babylon a sense of continuity and legitimacy, anchoring it in the shared heritage of Mesopotamia. Religious life also shaped the city's rise. Marduk, Babylon's patron deity, began as a relatively minor god, but over time he assumed a central role. Priests described him as the one who brought order to chaos, a cosmic king whose favor ensured prosperity. By associating their rule with Marduk's authority, Babylonian kings strengthened their political position. Temples became centers of both worship and economic power, managing land, storing surplus grain, and employing workers. To walk through Babylon at dawn might mean hearing the chants of priests rising with the sun, mingling with the voices of farmers preparing their tools. The physical environment of the city also reflected its ambitions. Houses of mud brick lined narrow streets, while open courtyards provided space for cooking and gathering. Markets thrived in designated squares, where merchants bartered cloth, oil, and livestock. The palace, though not yet the grand complex it would become under later kings, symbolized royal authority. Within its walls, officials handled correspondence, planned military actions, and collected taxes in the form of grain or silver. Even in its formative years, Babylon revealed the structures of governance that would enable Hammurabi to build his empire. As we consider the rise of Babylon, it is helpful to remember that growth was not linear or inevitable. Droughts, raids, and shifting alliances constantly threatened stability. Yet Babylon persisted, adapting and enduring. The resilience of its people, their devotion to Marduk, and the skill of their leaders combined to carry the city through uncertain times. Hammurabi would inherit not a blank slate, but a strong foundation, one that awaited the guiding hand of a determined ruler. And so, as this section closes, we leave Babylon on the cusp of greatness. Its streets are busy, its temples active, and its walls sturdy against rivals. The Euphrates flows steadily past, carrying with it both lifeblood and the promise of connection to distant lands. In the soft evening light, one might imagine the city quieting after a day's work, preparing for the challenges and triumphs to come. Babylon is ready to step onto the larger stage of history, and soon Hammurabi will lead it there. Life within the city of Babylon offers us a glimpse into the rhythms of daily existence in ancient Mesopotamia. To walk its streets in the early 2nd millennium BCE is to encounter a world at once familiar in its human concerns and distant in its customs and architecture. The city pulses with the activities of farmers, craftsmen, merchants, priests, and officials, all contributing to a complex society sustained by the river and guided by tradition. In this section, we linger among the sights, sounds, and textures of Babylonian life, allowing its details to unfold gently like a soft evening breeze. At the heart of Babylon were its houses, typically constructed of mud brick, the most abundant material in the region. Sun-dried bricks were stacked and bound with bitumen or plaster, forming walls that kept out heat by day and retained coolness by night. Roofs were flat and often used as living spaces where families slept during hot summers or gathered under the stars. Inside, rooms were arranged around a central courtyard, which provided light and ventilation. Within these walls, families cooked, worked, and rested, their lives organized around simple but durable domestic structures. Meals reflected the resources of the land. Barley was a staple, transformed into bread and beer. Dates, both sweet and nourishing, were harvested from palm groves, while vegetables such as onions, lentils, and cucumbers enriched stews. Meat was rarer, often reserved for wealthier households or special occasions, though fish from the rivers supplied protein to many. The preparation of food was communal, with ovens and courtyards filling the air with the scent of baking bread. At dawn, the streets carried the aromas of grain and oil, mingling with the earthy scent of clay and water. Markets formed the lively centers of economic life. Merchants displayed textiles woven from wool, jars of oil, and baskets of dates. Traders from distant lands brought metals from Anatolia, cedar from Lebanon, and shells from the Persian Gulf. Prices were negotiated, often in silver, which served as a measure of value even when barter remained common. The marketplace was also a space of encounter, where news traveled as quickly as goods. One could hear accents from many regions, a reminder that Babylon's fortunes were tied to networks that reached beyond Mesopotamia itself. Artisans played a crucial role in shaping daily life. Potters worked at their wheels, producing storage jars and fine drinking cups. Metalworkers hammered bronze into tools, weapons, and ornaments. Seal carvers etched intricate designs onto small cylinders that were rolled across clay to mark ownership or authenticate documents. These seals were not only practical, but also artistic, featuring depictions of gods, animals, and mythical scenes. In their quiet workshops, craftsmen added beauty and identity to the practical necessities of life. Education was another cornerstone of Babylonian society. Schools, often attached to temples or run by private tutors, trained boys, primarily from elite families, in the art of writing. Using reed styluses, students pressed marks into clay tablets, practicing the complex signs of cuneiform. The path to becoming a scribe was demanding, requiring years of repetition and memorization. Yet the rewards were significant, as scribes were essential to administration, commerce, and law. In a world where written records defined ownership, debt, and contracts, literacy was both a skill and a privilege. For those who mastered it, clay tablets became tools of memory and guardians of truth. Religion permeated every aspect of life. Each household maintained small shrines to protective spirits, while temples to major gods dominated the city skyline. Festivals punctuated the year, drawing crowds into rituals of music, offerings, and processions. The New Year festival in Babylon was particularly important, celebrating the god Marduk and reaffirming the bond between deity and king. Through such ceremonies, people found reassurance in the face of uncertainty, linking their fate to the rhythms of divine order. Social life reflected both hierarchy and community. At the top were the royal family and high officials, followed by priests, landowners, and merchants. Farmers, herders, and laborers formed the backbone of production, while enslaved individuals performed heavy tasks or served in households. Yet, despite these divisions, life was interconnected. A farmer relied on the canals maintained by the state, the scribe recorded his contracts, and the temple offered protection through rituals. The city was an organism, each part dependent on the other, all flowing within the framework of law and custom. Even leisure found a place in daily routines. Music, played on harps, lyres, and flutes, filled gatherings with gentle melodies. Board games, such as the game of 20 squares, entertained families and offered a chance for quiet competition. Storytelling, both oral and written, connected generations with the myths of gods and heroes. In the soft glow of oil lamps, families might listen to recitations of epics, their imaginations carried beyond the walls of their homes into realms of divine adventure. As the sun set each evening, the city took on a quieter tone. Merchants packed up their stalls, children returned home, and priests offered evening prayers. Smoke from cooking fires drifted upward, mingling with the darkening sky. The Euphrates flowed steadily past the city, its waters reflecting the stars. In these moments, Babylon seemed both timeless and fragile, a place where human effort met the vastness of nature. The lives of its people were filled with routine, yet their collective endeavors created a society that would leave a lasting mark on history. And so we pause here, within the streets and courtyards of Babylon. The details of daily life remind us that history is not only the story of kings and battles, but of families, meals, songs, and work. These ordinary rhythms form the quiet heartbeat of civilization, steady and enduring, carrying us onward into the deeper currents of Mesopotamian history. As we drift further into the story of Babylon, we find ourselves surrounded by the sacred spaces of the city. Religion is not a separate sphere in Mesopotamian life. It is the foundation on which society rests. To understand Hammurabi's world, we must understand the gods and the temples that shape the thoughts, actions, and institutions of his people. In this section, let us linger gently in these sanctuaries, where faith and daily life intertwine. The Babylonian pantheon is vast, filled with deities who embody the forces of nature and aspects of human experience. At its core are gods inherited from earlier Sumerian traditions: Anu, the Sky Father; Enlil, the lord of air and authority, Ea, also called Enki, the god of wisdom and water, and Shamash, the sun god and divine judge. In Babylon, however, Marduk rises above them all. Originally a local god, he becomes the city's patron and, in time, the supreme figure of Mesopotamian religion. His temple, the Esagila, is more than a building. It is the spiritual heart of Babylon, a place where the earthly and divine meet. Temples are not only centers of worship, but also economic hubs. Priests oversee offerings of grain, livestock, and precious goods. These offerings support the temple staff, fund construction projects, and ensure that rituals are carried out without interruption. Temples own land, employ laborers, and store surpluses, acting almost like banks for the community. To walk into a temple courtyard is to step into a bustling complex where sacred and practical matters mingle. The smell of burning incense drifts upward, mingling with the sounds of livestock and the scratch of styluses on clay as scribes record transactions. The architecture of temples reflects their cosmic role. Ziggurats, massive step towers built of mud brick, rise prominently, their shapes echoing mountains. In a flat land without natural high places, these artificial mountains symbolize a bridge between earth and sky. To climb their levels is to ascend toward the realm of the gods. From the top, priests watch the horizon, reading omens in the stars, winds, and flights of birds. These observations guide decisions about planting, warfare, and even royal decrees, for the gods are believed to speak through the signs of the natural world. Rituals fill the calendar. Daily offerings of food, drink, and incense maintain harmony with the gods, while larger festivals mark the seasons. The New Year festival, called the Akitu, is the most elaborate. Over several days, priests recite hymns, perform rituals, and reenact the story of Marduk's victory over chaos. The king himself participates, humbling himself before the statue of Marduk, reaffirming that his authority depends upon divine approval. In these moments, political power and religious devotion are inseparable, woven together in ceremony and myth. Ordinary people also live within this web of faith. Each family maintains small household shrines to protective spirits, known as lamasu or personal gods, who safeguard the home. Amulets inscribed with prayers hang on walls or around necks, offering protection from illness, misfortune, and demons. Illness is often explained as a sign of divine displeasure, so healing involves both practical remedies, herbs, poultices, and baths, and ritual acts, such as incantations or sacrifices. Religion provides comfort in the face of uncertainty, anchoring individuals within the vast cosmic order. Priests play a vital role as mediators between gods and humans. Trained in sacred texts and rituals, they maintain temple routines, interpret omens, and advise rulers. Their authority derives not only from spiritual knowledge, but also from control over resources. In many ways, priests are the keepers of both divine will and earthly stability. Yet their relationship with kings can be delicate, for both claim to represent the gods' desires. Hammurabi, like other rulers, balances this by presenting himself as chosen by Marduk, a shepherd of his people, tasked with maintaining justice and order. Art and literature reflect the centrality of the gods. Hymns praise their deeds, prayers seek their aid, and myths explain their role in shaping the world. The Enuma Elish, Babylon's creation epic, tells of Marduk's triumph over the chaotic goddess Tiamat. By slaying her and forming the world from her divided body, Marduk establishes order and grants humanity its place. Such stories are more than entertainment. They are frameworks through which people interpret existence itself. To recite them is to reaffirm the structure of the universe. Even the law is framed in religious terms. Justice is not merely a human invention, but a divine principle. Shamash, the sun god, is depicted as the source of law, his rays illuminating fairness and truth. Hammurabi, when he later inscribes his code, presents it as a gift of the gods to ensure harmony. To obey the law is thus both a civic duty and a sacred act. In this way, religion permeates not just worship, but governance, economics, and daily conduct. As night falls over Babylon, the temples glow softly with the light of oil lamps. Priests murmur prayers, families whisper invocations before sleep, and the ziggurat looms silently against the starry sky. The gods feel close, present in every rustling leaf, every shift of wind, every flicker of firelight. For the people of Babylon, the sacred is not distant, but ever near, woven seamlessly into the fabric of their lives. And so we close this section with reflection. The gods of Mesopotamia may no longer be worshipped, but the structures they inspired, temples, rituals, laws, and myths, remain as echoes in our history. To dwell in this moment is to sense how profoundly religion shaped the world Hammurabi would one day rule. In our own quiet reflection, we too touch the timeless rhythm of belief, steady and calming as we drift further along the river of history. We now arrive at the moment when Hammurabi himself steps into the story, a young ruler inheriting a throne in a city poised between obscurity and greatness. His ascent marks a turning point not only for Babylon, but for Mesopotamia as a whole. To understand Hammurabi's path to kingship and unification, we must trace the delicate weave of politics, alliances, and personal ambition that shaped his early reign. Hammurabi came to the throne in 1792 BCE, succeeding his father, Sin-Muballit. At the time, Babylon was still a relatively small kingdom compared with its rivals. To the south lay Larsa, a powerful state with rich agricultural lands. To the east was Elam, a formidable kingdom beyond the Zagros Mountains. To the north, Assyria's rulers commanded respect with their disciplined armies and trade networks. And scattered across Mesopotamia were smaller city-states, each guarding its independence while watching its neighbors carefully. Hammurabi inherited not peace, but a chessboard filled with tension and opportunity. His first challenge was survival. Newly crowned, Hammurabi had to establish his authority at home. This meant ensuring the loyalty of nobles, priests, and generals. Like other Mesopotamian kings, he claimed divine legitimacy, presenting himself as chosen by Marduk, Babylon's patron god, to act as shepherd of the people. In temples, priests invoked his name in rituals, linking his rule to divine favor. In markets and fields, officials enforced his decrees, ensuring that his presence was felt even in distant villages. Slowly, Hammurabi extended his roots, securing Babylon from within. Diplomacy became his next tool. Hammurabi understood that Babylon alone could not challenge larger states directly. He therefore cultivated alliances, sometimes through treaties, sometimes through careful promises. Neighboring rulers saw in him not yet a conqueror, but a partner who could help balance the shifting dynamics of Mesopotamian politics. These relationships bought him time to strengthen his army, expand his resources, and position Babylon for greater ambitions. The army was central to Hammurabi's rise. Soldiers were drawn from Babylon's population, but they were organized into disciplined units, equipped with spears, bows, and axes. Chariots, though expensive, gave speed and impact on the battlefield. Hammurabi invested in training and logistics, ensuring that his forces could be mobilized quickly. Canals served not only agriculture, but also troop movement, linking the city with surrounding regions. Under his guidance, Babylon's military became a tool not just for defense, but for calculated expansion. Gradually, Hammurabi shifted from diplomacy to conquest. His campaigns were not reckless charges, but carefully timed strikes. When rivals were weakened by internal strife or external wars, he moved decisively. To the south, he brought Larsa under his control, securing fertile lands and vital waterways. To the north and east, he extended Babylon's reach over smaller states, incorporating them into his growing kingdom. Each victory brought not only territory but also prestige, reinforcing the sense that Hammurabi was a ruler destined for greatness. Yet, Hammurabi's power did not rest on force alone. He understood that true authority required integration. Conquered cities were not left in ruin, but incorporated into Babylon's system of governance. Local elites were often retained, temples were respected, and laws were extended. In doing so, Hammurabi ensured that new territories felt part of a larger whole rather than simply occupied. This policy of unification gave his empire a durability that many earlier conquests had lacked. Religion played a crucial role in this integration. By promoting Marduk as the supreme deity, Hammurabi offered a unifying spiritual framework. Conquered peoples were encouraged to honor Marduk alongside their local gods, creating a hierarchy of divinity that mirrored the political hierarchy. The annual New Year festival in Babylon became a symbol of unity, drawing representatives from across the empire to participate. In this way, Hammurabi's political vision was reinforced by religious ritual, binding together diverse regions under a shared sacred order. Economics also strengthened his rule. By controlling trade routes, Hammurabi ensured a steady flow of goods into Babylon. Caravans carrying tin, copper, timber, and textiles enriched the city, while surplus grain supported both the population and the army. Taxes, collected in silver or kind, funded the administration. Officials recorded transactions on clay tablets, ensuring accountability. This bureaucratic system, grounded in writing, gave Hammurabi the ability to oversee vast territories with a level of precision that earlier rulers could not achieve. By the later years of his reign, Hammurabi had transformed Babylon from a modest city-state into the dominant power of Mesopotamia. His empire stretched across much of the Fertile Crescent, its borders guarded by loyal troops, and its heart pulsing with trade and ritual. To his people, he was not only a warrior, but a shepherd, chosen by Marduk to bring justice and order. His name carried weight, not only in Babylon, but across the plains and rivers of Mesopotamia. As we pause here, we reflect on the delicate balance Hammurabi maintained between force and diplomacy, tradition and innovation, unity and diversity. His ascent reminds us that history often turns not on sudden revolutions, but on steady accumulation of choices, carefully measured and patiently enacted. In the soft stillness of night, his rise feels like the gradual unfolding of a river's course, inevitable, steady, and enduring. Now we come to one of the most enduring legacies of Hammurabi's reign, his famous code of laws. When we speak of Hammurabi today, his name is almost always tied to the Great Stele, inscribed with nearly 300 legal provisions, standing tall like a guardian of order. To explore this code is to enter the very heart of Babylonian justice, where everyday disputes and lofty ideals are preserved in stone. As we drift gently through this section, let us imagine ourselves standing before the black diorite stele itself, the words carved with care, waiting to be read. The Code of Hammurabi, inscribed around 1754 BCE, is among the earliest and most complete legal texts from the ancient world. At its top, carved in relief, is an image of Hammurabi standing before Shamash, the sun god and divine judge. Shamash extends a rod and ring, symbols of justice and authority, to the king, affirming that the laws below are not merely human inventions, but divine mandates. This imagery sets the tone. Hammurabi's authority is framed as sacred, his role not simply as a ruler, but as the chosen shepherd of justice. The laws themselves cover a vast range of human affairs. Property rights are carefully detailed, with rules about land sales, tenancy, and inheritance. Contracts for trade, loans, and partnerships are standardized, protecting both merchants and clients. Family matters receive considerable attention, from marriage and divorce to the responsibilities of fathers and sons. Crimes are addressed with precision, ranging from theft and assault to false accusations and negligence. Each law begins with a conditional phrase, "If a man does this," followed by the prescribed consequence. This structure offers both clarity and consistency. What strikes the modern reader is the principle of proportion woven throughout. Many laws follow the concept of an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, known as lex talionis. If a builder constructs a house that collapses and kills the owner, the builder himself may be put to death. If a man puts out the eye of another, his own eye may be taken. Yet punishment is not always equal. Social status influences outcomes. Hurting a noble might bring severe retribution, while harming a slave might require only financial compensation. Justice, in Hammurabi's code, is hierarchical as well as proportional. Despite this inequality, the code represents a profound attempt to standardize law across a diverse empire. By inscribing the laws on stone and placing them in public view, Hammurabi proclaimed that justice was not arbitrary. All could see, or have read to them, the principles by which disputes would be resolved. This transparency was revolutionary in a world where kings often ruled by decree. The code acted as both a legal framework and a statement of legitimacy. Babylon was orderly because Hammurabi, with divine guidance, ensured fairness. The laws also shed light on daily life. We learn that farmers rented oxen for plowing, that merchants loaned silver with interest, and that tavern keepers could be held accountable for misconduct. We see families negotiating dowries, sons inheriting estates, and laborers seeking fair wages. These details ground the code in reality. It is not abstract philosophy, but practical regulation of lived experience. In the stillness of night, as we listen to these laws, we sense the hum of Babylon's streets, the disputes in its markets, the concerns of its households. Religion and law are intertwined throughout. Shamash as divine judge is invoked repeatedly, and oaths before gods carry legal weight. Temples serve as courts, with priests and officials acting as witnesses. In disputes, people swear by the gods to affirm truth, believing that divine punishment awaits falsehood. Thus, justice is enforced not only by human authority, but by fear of divine retribution. The gods watch over the city, ensuring that order is preserved. Scholars debate whether the code was applied literally in every case. It may have served more as a model of ideal justice than as a daily legal manual. Judges likely interpreted disputes flexibly, guided by precedent and practicality. Yet the symbolic power of the code was immense. It proclaimed that the king's duty was not only to conquer, but also to protect the weak, to uphold fairness, and to embody divine justice on earth. This vision of kingship shaped not only Babylon, but future civilizations as well. The stele itself, nearly 7 feet tall, stood in a public place for centuries. Later, it was carried off as spoils of war by the Elamites, and eventually rediscovered in modern times at Susa, where archaeologists uncovered it in 1901. Today, it rests in the Louvre Museum in Paris, its inscription still legible after nearly 4 millennia. To stand before it is to feel a direct connection to Hammurabi's Babylon, the words whispering across time like the gentle murmur of a river. As we reflect, we sense that Hammurabi's code is more than a collection of rules. It is a vision of society itself, structured, ordered, and anchored in divine justice. It tells us that law is not merely about punishment, but about harmony, ensuring that life flows smoothly even in a world full of unpredictability. Like the steady current of the Euphrates, the code sought to carry Babylon safely forward. And so, as this section comes to a close, imagine the soft flicker of torchlight on the stele's dark surface. The carved figures of king and god stand eternal, while the laws below rest quietly in the stone. Their presence is calming, a reminder that even in ancient times, people sought stability, fairness, and peace. In listening, we too find reassurance, as if lulled by the steady rhythm of justice carried on the evening air. As Hammurabi secured his throne and inscribed his laws, he also looked outward toward the broader horizons of Mesopotamia and beyond. Babylon's rise was not only a matter of governance and justice, but also of expansion through both trade and conquest. In this section, we drift along the caravan routes and riverbanks that connected Babylon to distant lands, exploring how Hammurabi balanced diplomacy, war, and commerce to weave his empire together. Trade was the lifeblood of Mesopotamia. The land between rivers was fertile, but it lacked essential resources such as timber, stone, and metal. To build palaces, forge tools, and create luxury goods, Babylonians relied on long-distance exchange. Caravans of donkeys plodded steadily across dusty plains, carrying silver, wool, and grain outward, and returning with copper from Oman, tin from Anatolia, and cedar from Lebanon. Along the riverbanks, barges loaded with grain and clay jars drifted downstream, propelled by the gentle current of the Euphrates. In markets, these goods found eager buyers, stimulating an economy that sustained artisans, farmers, and merchants alike. Babylon's strategic position allowed Hammurabi to control these trade arteries. By uniting neighboring city-states, he secured key routes, reducing the risks of raids or rival tariffs. Soldiers stationed along roads and canals offered protection, ensuring that goods could move more freely. In this way, expansion was not only about conquest, but about stability. An empire that fostered safe commerce was an empire that prospered. Hammurabi understood that the prosperity of merchants and farmers ultimately strengthened his own power. Yet trade and diplomacy alone could not guarantee Babylon's supremacy. Hammurabi was also a military strategist. He engaged in campaigns that gradually extended Babylon's boundaries, each timed with precision. When neighboring states quarreled among themselves, he intervened. When a rival was weakened by internal dissent, he pressed his advantage. Step by step, he brought cities such as Larsa, Mari, and Eshnunna under his control, creating an empire that stretched across much of Mesopotamia. One of his most famous conquests was the city of Mari, a prosperous center on the Euphrates with strong cultural and political ties to Syria. Mari's archives, uncovered by archaeologists in the 20th century, revealed detailed correspondence between Hammurabi and other rulers. These letters show him not only as a conqueror, but as a careful diplomat, negotiating alliances, requesting troops, and managing delicate relationships. The conquest of Mari not only gave him territory, but also access to vital trade networks that connected Mesopotamia with the Mediterranean. Hammurabi's expansion also reshaped the political map of the region. By defeating Larsa in the south, he gained control of vital agricultural lands. By bringing Eshnunna into his realm, he secured the approaches to the Zagros Mountains and access to eastern trade. With each conquest, Babylon became more than a city-state. It became the beating heart of an empire, radiating influence outward in every direction. Hammurabi styled himself not just as king of Babylon, but as king of the four quarters of the earth, echoing the grand titles of earlier rulers like Sargon of Akkad. Economically, this expansion brought wealth. Tribute from conquered lands flowed into Babylon, measured in grain, livestock, silver, and labor. Skilled workers from across the empire contributed their talents to building projects, enriching the city's cultural fabric. The temple of Marduk gleamed with offerings, while the palace swelled with supplies. For ordinary Babylonians, expansion meant both opportunity and burden, new goods in the markets, but also heavier taxes and military service. Cultural exchange accompanied this expansion. Babylon absorbed traditions from the cities it conquered, blending them into its own identity. Myths, rituals, and artistic styles mingled, creating a rich tapestry of culture. Hammurabi's court became a place where scribes copied texts from Sumerian and Akkadian traditions, preserving the wisdom of earlier ages while adapting it for a new imperial audience. In this way, expansion did not erase local cultures, but brought them into conversation, enriching Babylon's heritage. Yet expansion carried costs. Campaigns demanded resources, and armies required constant upkeep. Conquered peoples did not always welcome Babylonian rule, and rebellions simmered at times. Hammurabi had to balance firmness with pragmatism, suppressing resistance while allowing local traditions to continue. His strategy was one of integration rather than destruction. But even so, the strains of empire were real. Maintaining unity across vast distances was an achievement that required constant vigilance. As we consider Hammurabi's expansion, it becomes clear that his vision was broader than immediate conquest. He sought not just to win battles, but to knit together a coherent realm. Trade routes secured, temples respected, laws extended, and loyalty cultivated, these were the threads of his empire. In this sense, Hammurabi was both warrior and administrator, conqueror and builder, shaping a Babylon that could endure beyond his lifetime. And so, as we pause here, let us imagine the empire at its height. Caravans stretch across the horizon, their bells jingling softly in the distance. Barges glide along the river, their sails catching the wind. Soldiers guard the gates, scribes record transactions, and priests bless offerings to the gods. Babylon hums with prosperity, its influence reaching far beyond its walls. Hammurabi, in his palace, surveys a realm that he has brought together through strength, wisdom, and vision. In this moment, Babylon stands secure, its horizons wide and its heart steady. As we drift further through the river of history, we begin to see the shadows lengthening over Babylon after Hammurabi's death. No empire, however carefully built, lasts forever. The reign of Hammurabi had brought unity, wealth, and prestige, but sustaining such an achievement required more than one man's vision. In this section, we quietly follow the city through its decline, watching how shifting powers and external pressures slowly eroded the dominance of Babylon in the centuries after its golden age. Hammurabi died around 1750 BCE, leaving behind a realm that stretched across much of Mesopotamia. His successors inherited both the glory and the burden of empire. At first, they continued his policies, administering provinces, enforcing laws, and maintaining trade routes. But the delicate balance that Hammurabi had crafted began to unravel. Without his skill in diplomacy and strategy, the empire struggled to hold together. Rivals who had been subdued rose again, testing the resolve of Babylon's kings. One of the greatest challenges came from the Kassites, a people from the Zagros Mountains to the east. Gradually, they pressed into Mesopotamia, eventually establishing themselves as rulers of Babylon. Their arrival did not bring destruction so much as transformation. The Kassites adopted Babylonian culture, language, and gods, ruling the city for centuries while blending their traditions into its fabric. Yet their rise marked the end of Hammurabi's dynasty and the beginning of a new chapter in Babylon's long story. Meanwhile, pressures mounted from other directions. To the north, the Assyrians grew in strength, building a formidable military state that would one day dominate the region. To the west, Hittite armies advanced from Anatolia, raiding deep into Mesopotamia. In 1595 BCE, a Hittite king even marched on Babylon itself, sacking the city and carrying away the stele of Hammurabi's code. Though the Hittites did not stay, their attack demonstrated Babylon's vulnerability. What had been a center of empire became, for a time, a prize contested by stronger powers. Economically, the decline was also evident. The vast system of canals and fields that had supported Hammurabi's empire required constant maintenance. Without strong central authority, neglect set in. Irrigation systems silted up, harvests declined, and food shortages weakened the population. Trade routes, once secured by Babylon's armies, became less reliable as bandits and rival states disrupted commerce. The prosperity that had filled markets and enriched temples waned, leaving Babylon diminished compared to its former brilliance. Yet Babylon never disappeared. Even in decline, the city remained an important cultural and religious center. Temples continued their rituals, scribes copied texts, and families tended their homes. The cult of Marduk, in particular, endured, ensuring that Babylon retained a spiritual significance even when its political power faltered. Pilgrims and officials from across Mesopotamia still looked to the city's sanctuaries, reinforcing its place in the collective imagination. In this way, Babylon survived as more than a capital. It was a symbol of divine order, even when empires shifted around it. The Kassite dynasty, once established, brought a measure of stability. They rebuilt Babylon, restored canals, and integrated themselves into Mesopotamian society. Over time, Babylon regained a degree of strength, though never quite the dominance it had enjoyed under Hammurabi. The memory of his reign lingered, however, serving as a standard against which later kings measured themselves. Hammurabi became a symbol of justice and order, his laws remembered even when his empire was gone. As centuries passed, Babylon's fortunes continued to rise and fall. At times, it stood under foreign domination. Assyrians, Persians, and others would claim it in their turn. At other times, it enjoyed periods of revival, as under Nebuchadnezzar II 1,000 years later, when the city reached new heights of grandeur. The rhythm of Babylon's history is thus one of cycles: decline, renewal, and transformation. Hammurabi's empire may have faded, but the city's identity proved remarkably resilient. To reflect on Babylon's decline after Hammurabi is to reflect on the fragility of human achievement. Empires rise on the strength of leaders, armies, and laws, but they falter under the weight of time, circumstance, and change. Yet even in their fading, they leave traces, ideas, institutions, and memories that outlast the walls of stone and brick. Hammurabi's laws survived long after his dynasty ended. Babylon's name echoed in later centuries, inspiring awe, caution, and imagination. And so, as we let this section settle, we picture Babylon in twilight. The Euphrates still flows, its waters touching the city walls. Farmers still bend over their fields, though harvests are leaner. Priests still chant hymns to Marduk, though the crowds are smaller. Soldiers still guard the gates, though their numbers are fewer. Babylon remains alive, even as its power wanes, carrying forward into the long night of history. In this gentle decline, we sense both melancholy and resilience. Hammurabi's achievements could not be preserved intact, yet they planted seeds that would sprout in later ages. Empires may pass, but the idea of Babylon endures, whispered through stone, clay, and memory, lulling us further along the stream of time. As we arrive at the final stage of our journey, we turn our gaze from Hammurabi's lifetime to his long afterlife. The legacy of Hammurabi in Mesopotamia is not confined to the clay tablets or stone steles of the ancient world. It reaches forward, shaping cultures, inspiring rulers, and influencing the very ways in which we conceive of law, governance, and civilization. In this section, we reflect gently on the enduring impact of Babylon's king and the land between rivers, allowing the echoes of their story to lull us into a quiet sense of continuity. Hammurabi's code is perhaps the most obvious part of his legacy. The stele that bears his laws now rests far from Babylon, in the Louvre Museum in Paris, yet its presence in the modern world demonstrates its significance. Scholars, jurists, and historians see in it the beginnings of codified law. an attempt to fix justice in words and make it visible to all. Though not the very first code in Mesopotamia, it became the most famous, influencing later traditions in the region. The idea that rulers must establish and enforce written laws would echo through civilizations, shaping expectations of governance. Even today, Hammurabi's name is invoked in discussions of law and order, his stele standing as both artifact and symbol. But Hammurabi's legacy extends beyond the code. His unification of Mesopotamia set a precedent for later empires. The Assyrians, Persians, and others who came after him would likewise seek to govern diverse peoples through a blend of force, administration, and cultural integration. Hammurabi showed that a city-state could grow into a regional power by balancing diplomacy with conquest, and by weaving together law, religion, and economy. In this sense, his reign foreshadowed patterns of empire that would shape the ancient Near East for centuries. Culturally, Babylon under Hammurabi became a beacon of preservation. Scribes in his city copied and transmitted texts from earlier Sumerian traditions, ensuring that myths, hymns, and epics survived the passing of dynasties. Works such as the Epic of Gilgamesh, though originating earlier, were preserved in Babylonian libraries, linking Hammurabi's time to the deep memory of Mesopotamia. By supporting this literary culture, Hammurabi contributed to the endurance of stories that still resonate today, their rhythms as calming and reflective as the murmur of a bedtime tale. Religion, too, carried his influence forward. Hammurabi elevated Marduk, Babylon's god, to supreme status, weaving his patron deity into the broader pantheon. Later rulers, even when not of Hammurabi's line, maintained Marduk's primacy, ensuring that Babylon remained a spiritual center. In this way, Hammurabi's religious vision helped define the city's identity long after his dynasty ended. Festivals, rituals, and hymns continued to honor Marduk, reinforcing Babylon's symbolic role as the seat of divine order. In the wider world, echoes of Mesopotamia and Hammurabi reached far. The Hebrews, during their contact with Mesopotamia, absorbed influences that shaped their own traditions. Scholars have noted parallels between Hammurabi's laws and certain passages in the Hebrew Bible, particularly in the book of Exodus. While the connections are complex and debated, they suggest that the ideals of justice and proportion that Hammurabi codified reverberated beyond his borders. Through such channels, Mesopotamian thought found its way into traditions that still guide societies today. The physical legacy of Babylon is equally striking. Though the city declined after Hammurabi, it rose again in later centuries, most famously under Nebuchadnezzar II. The Ishtar Gate, with its blue-glazed bricks and striding lions, remains an emblem of Babylonian splendor. Visitors in antiquity spoke of the city's grandeur, its walls, temples, and gardens. Even in decline, Babylon captured the imagination of neighboring peoples, becoming a byword for magnificence and later for hubris in biblical texts. Hammurabi's reign was only one chapter in this long story, but it was a foundational one, setting Babylon on the path to legendary status. Modern archaeology has brought Hammurabi and his world back into view. The discovery of the lost stele at Susa in 1901, the excavation of temples and palaces, and the deciphering of cuneiform tablets have all allowed us to reconstruct his era. Museums today house these objects, offering visitors a quiet connection to a distant past. Standing before the stele or reading the wedge-shaped marks on clay, one can almost hear the calm voice of a scribe or the steady authority of Hammurabi himself. These rediscoveries remind us that the past, though silent, still speaks when we listen closely. Perhaps Hammurabi's deepest legacy lies in the idea of order itself. In a world of unpredictable floods, shifting alliances, and fragile harvests, he sought to provide stability through law, ritual, and governance. His reign embodied the belief that human societies can impose structure on chaos, guided by divine favor and practical wisdom. That belief, gentle yet profound, is one that continues to guide civilizations. It is a reminder that the pursuit of justice and stability is as old as the first cities and as enduring as the rivers that sustained them. And so, as our journey draws to a close, we rest in the legacy of Hammurabi and Mesopotamia. From the first farmers along the Tigris and Euphrates to the bustling streets of Babylon, to the enduring laws carved in stone, we have followed a story of resilience and vision. Hammurabi's voice may no longer be heard, but his influence flows through history like a steady current. As we prepare for sleep, Imagine the quiet of Babylon at night. The stars glimmer above the ziggurat, the river flows softly by, and the city rests after centuries of triumph and trial. In that stillness, Hammurabi's legacy remains, calm, steady, and eternal, a gentle guide into dreams.